Hello, everybody. Welcome to the media show on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Pallavito. I'm your host for today, and we have a very interesting conversation that deals with other media. And we want to see, well, what is the best news source out there? And with that, I have several choices we're going to look at today. And there's going to be more, of course. What would be the best source of media for the news? So we do have three of them we want to look at right now off the top, which is CNN, the BBC, and MSNBC. So with that, we're going to the person who worked in media at Jimmy Kimmel Live. We're bringing in Rick Rosner. Rick Rosner, welcome to the show.
Hey.
And you're probably familiar with these three tyrants. I'm going to say these three distribution points. In terms of news, what are your thoughts about these three?
All the American news things are rotten. They're just terrible. So by default, that leaves BBC, but nobody watches BBC.
Okay, so the thing is, you're right. So you don't think too much of the other two. We'll bring in
Twitter used to be pretty good, but then Elon Musk turned it into just a sewage pit.
Okay, Jim Mead, what are your thoughts on terms of news coverage? CNN, BBC, MSNBC.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't include Fox. But I agree with Rick on Elon Musk destroying Twitter, which is a good source of information until he took his anti-Semitic far-right destruction, chaos before truth attitude to destroy it. But I have to say CNN used to be balanced, but when Fox became really powerful, CNN took a hard right turn. And so I haven't watched it in a long time. I watched one show on MSNBC, and I do that pretty regularly. And I have a BBC app, which I really like. It's got an international focus that the others don't. So I follow BBC and one show on MSNBC, and so I that's where I get my news sources. Of course, the New York Times is my primary news
Is that one show Rachel Maddow? I like her because she's deeply factual.
Rachel Maddow was a must-see TV for me.
You're kidding.
Well, she, I know she leans left, but she does a ton of research. And if you're looking at a ton of research, and the thing that's watchable is John Oliver on HBO. He does a topic in depth every week, and he makes it funny, even though what he's telling you is horrifying.
Absolutely, I agree.
Right.
He wins an Emmy every year.
I find those two people to be extremely biased. In other words, Rachel.
Of course, Maddow, you do, Nick.
She does a lot of research. I agree. She's smart. So is Laura Ingraham, but she's completely biased. I mean, in terms of trying to deliver a message to the public. So I just don't see her being an objective part of media at all. As a matter of fact, a lot of media is not objective at all. The minute there's a conversation, they always intercept with their opinion before the conversation.
Yeah, but you changed the topic, Nick. You didn't say objective when you began the show. So
I just want to know what your thoughts of this group.
Well, let's go after Fox. Fox is a gateway drug to lead you to even more lunatic right-wing media, and it's made tens of millions of Americans a little bit crazy. I mean, I'm liberal, so I'm crazy in the other direction, but I think if you could fix Fox, you could, that would go a long way if you had to get rid of, to get rid of Fox, you had to get rid of MSNBC and CNN. Just the getting rid of Fox would do a lot to help fix America.
Yeah. Well, I found Fox to also be very biased. Laura Ingraham, I've listened to her a couple times, and I keep thinking, okay, this person's going to tell this straight story, and she doesn't. She goes like, well, I guarantee you there was fraud in Arizona. I guarantee you that the Democrats going to lose and the Republicans going to win. I'm going, it was a close election. By the way, she was completely wrong. Now, Laura Ingraham, I found to be like Rachel Maddow, very intelligent, does a lot of research, and incredibly wrong. And Rachel Maddow,
I saw one funny thing on Fox over the last couple of days. They were doing a segment on the Five about how the stuffing in Oreos seems to have been reduced. Oreos are thinner.
oh yeah, right, I saw that. It was
Oh,
on
yeah.
the-
And one of the hosts asked, "Can we impeach Biden for this?"
Yeah.
right, that would be typical Fox.
It's a good as reason as any, isn't it?
Yeah,
But, leave
it's
Fox
gotta be up
alone,
there.
okay? Just because it's owned by a former Australian, okay? Just leave him alone for a minute. Now, I can tell you that I get most of my news from the financial press, and then if I'm interested in an article, I'll then go and look it up, and or because I don't put a lot in there, they tend to be from centre right sources, and so then I'll go and read the Guardian, or I'll read somebody else's view on it as well, so I can kind of try and get some kind of balance as to the issues. But I found, look, when you watch Fox, you sort of, you listen to Laura, you listen to Sean Hannity, and you're like, wow, America's in a really bad way. I was just in San Francisco earlier this year, and I'm like, oh, geez, I better take the jewelry off, and, there's going to be a homeless people. I'm going to get attacked. What's happened to California? I was in California. It was exactly the same as it used to be. So, I couldn't really tell much of a difference between the last time I was there and this time. But then if you watch CNN and some of those, you kind of get this other picture that there's, all these raving groups of racists running around America. And I'm like, well, that's not really been my experience there either. I know I'm a tourist and a guest of the country, but I think when you listen to any of those networks without looking at any other source, you can get quite a skewed vision or version of what's actually happening. And that's
I
a
think
pity.
we also need to say that Rachel is pretty much retired now. Rachel Maddow, she's once a week, and the one show that I do watch is Ari Melber now. He's a lawyer, Nick, and he's fairly balanced. He has guests on from both sides, and that's the show that I watch now. But that's the only show I watch on MSNBC. Of course, I don't watch anything on Fox. I used to watch on Fox just because I think you should know your enemy. But every hour on the hour, they were saying the same thing, and so they got messaging, and they just tried to drumbeat it in, so that no matter when you tuned in, you would get the same message.
Well, that's all the news channels where they call it 24-hour news, but it's really the same, 40 minutes of news,
Repeated.
36 times a day.
You're right. It's 40 minutes of news repeated 24 hours a day. And that's CNN.
And there's a whole world of news out there that we miss. At least BBC fills you in a little bit. But
I have that on my phone, and I do check in regularly. And I think that's probably the best in terms of journalism.
Yeah, I'll have to give my hat off to Mark Lee, who does our morning World Edition. He actually covers the news better, I think, than ABC, CBS, or NBC, because what they do there is they spend time on their agendas, and immediately, if there's anything that they perceive to be conservative, they say hard right. In other words, before they make a statement. And every time I listen to it, I go, why are they doing this on major media network? They're basically subliminally trying to influence me by, in other words, like Trump does something stupid, which he always does. And then all of a sudden it'll be the discredited Donald Trump. Okay. And they do that all the time on these three networks, which we call major media in the United States.
can I give a little history?
Fox does the opposite. Fox is always sit there, the hard left, the liberals, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. That's the thing. You get this completely distorted view of what's going on. And just with the BBC, look, I do think obviously you guys are enjoying the BBC, and that's great. But I think, for example, the BBC's coverage of what happened with the voice referendum in Australia was so biased. A lot of Australians have been really unhappy with their coverage because it just wasn't reflective of what was going on here. And I think that really is a concern for anybody when you look at media, even media in another country, to try to get a feel for what's happening in that country. It's very hard to do that when you're not actually living there. Even in a different state, it's very hard for you to kind of really know what's happening without yourself having contacts there and talking to them, because unfortunately you just can't trust the news to give you a well-rounded version of what's happening. Sorry, Kim.
I mean, but the subliminal way they do it, now we're going to listen to the hard left speaker, Rick Rosner. In other words, they always discredit the person before the person gets on.
So let me give a history of TV news. In the 1940s, when TV was starting in the 1940s, the government says you can broadcast across these wavelengths for free. We're not going to charge you a license fee as long as you provide a public service. The public service was news. So the networks put on 15 minutes of news a night, and then eventually half an hour of news a night. They didn't care about making money off of the news because it was their trade to get to use the airwaves. And then they started doing these morning shows like the Today Show, running 2 and then eventually 3 and sometimes 4 hours, and saw that happy news, so that the morning shows are kind of half news, half recipes, and those started making a ton of money. And then Ted Turner comes along in the 80s with CNN and shows you can make money with a 24-hour news show. So the old half-hour shows were crappy because they can only present news for half an hour. So you got a very abridged view of the world, but at least, it didn't have, all right, it was crappy in its own way. Then for-profit news comes along and just whatever holds eyeballs. They'll put a countdown clock in the corner, on CNN especially. They'll have knucklehead arguments like our show, except with bigger jerks, so people watch out of anger. And then they whatever the news story of the day is, like CNN loves when a plane goes down. It's all plane wreck all the time, and the missing, if a plane goes missing, even better because it's a mystery, and that's all you get.
Okay, Kim. Did you have your hand up?
No, all too often somebody will spread a rumor, and they're just running with it now. And even when they find out it was not true, they're not retracting anything anymore. They are not properly handling the truth in journalism. One of the reasons why I have just turned off CNN and Fox, even though I always tell myself watch it so that I can see what kind of lies are being propagandaed out there, and then I can try to counter some of it in some of my conversations or do some background checks. But NPR to me is probably one of the best sources, especially for the war situation that's going on. They get down to the roots of things. They don't just say, oh, knee jerk this, knee jerk that. They had a professor on the other day that was showing, that he went out and looked at some of the photos and said, hey, some of this is just pure crap. He said, that they took photos from another war. They're instigating information that is not true. The stories about the journalists that were there with Hamas just before it went, they attacked, that a lot of that was not true. It was misinformation that actually started in the headquarters of Israel. And they are now showing some of those documents where they were just making up stuff. But CNN, Fox, none of those people, Reuters, none of them were there. They, are denouncing it greatly because they don't want to be held accountable for anything so heinous. And there are rules in journalism that, if you can prevent things, you try to, but the whole idea of journalism is to be there to tell a story, not so much interfere or put your life in danger. So if they had brought you to a situation under one you know, hey, this is what we're doing, but then they switch on you and they want you to film something horrible, you know, sometimes your life's at danger too, and you have to do what's necessary to protect your life as well. You know, not everyone is superheroes where they're going to put their life on the line. They're going to just document the best what they can and move on. But a lot of journalists have been killed. Yes, Rick.
Yeah, there's a saying like
Jimmy,
a
Jimmy,
lie.
I'm
A
sorry.
lie flies around the world like Superman before the truth can even put on its pants.
Yeah, I wanted to double down on what Kim said about NPR. I think they have journalistic standards, as does PBS. But I did want to tell the story of my sister-in-law used to be a senior writer for Sports Illustrated. You know, and Sports Illustrated used to have in-depth reporting. Like the stories that they would tell were deeply researched, and they changed over time to become the fastest thing to get out sound bites. And so writers like my sister-in-law and all the people that she used to work with got, you know, let go. And they were replaced by people that could crank out news quickly. And so they weren't writing in depth anymore. Now, this isn't entirely true. There's always some writers there that are doing the old kind of research and writing and journalism. But people like her who were journalists had to go find other work. And this is one of the things that has happened with the speed of our society now. It's accelerated. And so everything has to be immediate, like the latest, like breaking news. Everything has to be breaking news. And, you know, sometimes you're just hearing the same breaking news for hours.
Yeah, AI writes a lot of stories now.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to pay AI.
Well,
and the LA Times, like newspapers are screwed. Only old people read newspapers, and barely any, you know, the LA Times can't even do sports scores anymore.
Yeah, thanks. The New York Times too.
Because their printing schedule, it's too expensive to print late at night after the games have been played.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, also the New York Times was credited with being the most factual, as well as the Wall Street Journal. So in terms of, you know, telling different sides of the same stories, they were both factually oriented, and they did print retractions.
Just quickly say that may not be true that you don't have to pay AI. I found out from some of my American friends that you can go to some places in America, go buy like a drink or a coffee or something. You're served by a robot. You check yourself out, and it still has the audacity to ask you for a tip. So the robots are coming for the tips. But I will say with Sports Illustrated, you know, forgive me because obviously it's not something I really grew up with, and all I know about is, you know, the hot, sexy women on the front cover. But it's very interesting that Milton Friedman, without going into the politics of him, he actually did an interview with Playboy magazine of all places. And that was quite an effective interview for him. So I think the world's changed as well, because you can't exactly have a leading economist. Where's he going to go now? Onto Pornhub? I mean, you can't. Yeah, that's not going to work today. But it was a very interesting thing that you'd find these sort of people in places you weren't really expecting them to be, but people would actually learn something that have their eyes open to a whole different thing.
It used to be a joke that I would read Playboy for the articles, but it was true. They did a good job.
But magazines are gone now too. Playboy has been gone for years. Playboy, monthly, every month it would run a 5,000 to 10,000 word, in-depth, really good interview with somebody often important.
Right.
And people used to have the attention span. I used to read several books a week. No more. My brain is Swiss cheese. I can only read 100 tweets at a time, and that's my attention span.
Thank you for saying that, Rick. I've been feeling guilty about my reading, and it's gone downhill too.
And when I do read, I'm reading comic books. When you watch a movie, see how many movies, not just Marvel movies, but like detective movies, thrillers, started off as comic books.
Rick, my book is in big print and only over 100 pages. You can digest this.
Well, when I go to the library, if a book has fat paragraphs, I'll throw it away. I only like little.
No Stephen King books for you. I do want to come back a little bit to Bison Media, though. As I did say before, I get a lot of my news originally from the financial press, but I actually don't look at much of the current financial press. I'll tend to look at last week's stories. If I'm trading, for example, I'll have other people tell me sort of what's happening, but I don't really want to know. I don't watch a lot of the financial stuff because I don't want to have any kind of slant on what I'm going to see when I see the markets. So I deliberately don't look at a lot of that stuff. And I tend to think that if that's what I'm doing in the finance markets, I know I'm a bit of a weirdo in the way that I trade the markets, but if that's what I'm doing in the finance markets, maybe we should do that in life. Don't read today's news, read last week's. I think a lot of people would be a lot happier if they read last week's news instead of today's news.
Very interesting, Shaq.
So I got conditioned to pay attention to the news because I worked on a late night show and we had to stay abreast of the news. And that was terrible because when Trump came along, I was conditioned to pay attention to him and it gave me irritable bowel syndrome. Are you guys familiar with what sharding is?
No.
That's where you think you're farting, but it's worse than that.
Gotcha.
And under Trump, it was shart central for me. I lost 15 pounds in the worst way and sharted at the gym, sharted in bed.
Oh.
So what we're hearing from the Californian liberal is
Give me your neck.
that Trump is no good. He's caused you to lose weight in an unhealthy way. And what we're hearing from the New York right-wingers at Fox is that Biden should be impeached because of shrinkflation with the cream inside the Oreo cookies.
Yes.
Good. I've got a handle for American politics
Cream
now.
deflation.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Cream deflation is not two words I would put together into one show.
You're muted, Kim, if you're trying to speak. You're muted. We can't hear you.
You're
Kim,
muted.
you're muted. You're muted. Muted.
Oh, still muted.
There you go.
So one of the things I've also noticed isn't just our media has been shrunk down to Twitter size. I mean, look at our movies, right? A lot of our movies used to be nice, long movies. And now sometimes they're not even an hour and 20 minutes. I mean,
Wow.
it's
And
something.
the series, they've gone down from like 16, 12 episodes to 6 or 8.
Well, there's different niches. Like sometimes they'll and Netflix will take a story that they should have told in a 2-hour movie and they'll turn it into 8 1-hour episodes. And so barely anything happens in each episode. That's frustrating.
It is.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, what Virgin River, I think it was, or something to that. The women were pregnant and this is a joke that us women had. I finally had to quit watching it, but my God, how long can you be pregnant? It was like 2 years worth of pregnancy. I was sick of it. It's like have the baby already and tell a different story. But it became unrealistic. And so I think that they're running short on the ability to write anyway. I think that they don't know how the creativity has just gone nowhere. And I think people are scared to invest in writing. The movies show no more creativity. They just keep remaking. The remake of Snow White's, I think we talked about this a little bit last week too. They're going to end up because they scrapped the remake because so many people were complaining about it. And they scrapped it already, invested $500 or $600 million. And the new version of the remake of Snow White is going to be over $1 billion from rumor resources. I have not confirmed it 100%.
So is this the conservative Snow White from Ben Shapiro's company?
Oh my
I think
goodness.
so.
And the girls in the news. Yeah.
The one with the Rachel girl.
Yeah.
And they were doing not dwarves, they were doing something else. And then they came back and said, oh, you know what? We're going to scrap all that. They filmed it and we're going to scrap all that. And now we're going to do dwarves. So and they're never going to make that money back ever. They just need to stop and start creating something new. Like I loved, even though it was kind of a remake of Snow White, but they did some of these like The Huntsman, right?
Yeah.
Which to me was just, a beautiful twist of the story. Not, when you look at The Wizard of Oz, don't remake Wizard of Oz, tell the story of the witches, right? Which I thought was beautiful.
Did you ever see that play? That was beautiful.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Right. So remake that, but don't remake the story, right? Remake.
But I think you were right to say that NPR for the radio listeners and PBS or TV watchers are the best example of journalism, because what we've defaulted is to confirmation bias. If you are hard right, you will watch Fox. If you're hard left, you will watch MSNBC. But there's no place that you can go for objective journalism anymore, except for NPR, PBS,
or Pod TV. We have some that, like Mark, I think.
Shout out to Mark Lee.
Shout out to Mark. He really works hard at bringing in the different perspectives. Finding the both sides of a story, which is very, very hard to do in this day and time because everybody's an extremist rather than, let's take a look at both sides of the story, or there might be 3 or 4.
I did.
But I think Mark does a fabulous job. When I listen to NPR, I don't hear opinions. I hear, we just spoke with so-and-so in this country. We just spoke with their coverage of the wars have just been very open-minded. And
shout out to NPR. I also think that, when I was growing up, Walter Cronkite, we thought this was objective journalism, and it was not, because I can remember thinking, oh, we're winning the Vietnam War because the body count that he told us about every day, there were more Vietnamese killed than there were U.S. soldiers. So we're winning. I was a child at the time, but still, there was a government influence on that we can't understate. So this is one of the things like Fox turned into the Soviet Union's TASS. They were the media for the White House, and when Trump was in the White House. So this is, something that we all have to pay attention to. We're capable of suffering from confirmation bias when we look for the information from the sources that we agree with already.
So, you got to triangulate. You got to, this is what I'm always yelling on my show where I yell at my conservative buddy Lance. It's like if you care enough about an issue, you need to Google it and look at a bunch of sources, conservative and liberal. Like the thing Lance and I have argued about is Trump a Russian dupe / spy? We've argued about that for 7 years. And you can go read a lot about it and it's not an easily, there's not a short answer to that. And the whole deal with Shokin, the Ukrainian prosecutor that's at the center of the Hunter Biden thing and the Joe Biden thing. And Shokin was this corrupt prosecutor in Ukraine. And if you want to learn, if you care about that whole mess, then you have to go online and read a half dozen articles on the whole mess.
I agree.
One of the things, though, that I look at, I know everyone's going to hate what I'm about to say, but
I do.
I'm just giving you advance warning. Sit down for this one. A lot of the stuff that we're focusing on in the media, and I guess this is why I kind of was very resistant to the sort of anti-Trump vibe from a lot of people in the US, is it was kind of to me like, who cares? How much is your life really going to change? And so this stuff that's going on, with the prosecutor in the Ukraine, and did Biden do this and that? Okay, if he did take bribes and all this sort of stuff, okay, that's bad. You have to deal with that. But how much is it really affecting your day-to-day life? People are more worried, I would think, or they should be more worried about, how they're paying their bills, their job security, their ability to buy a house, their kids going to college and all that sort of stuff. And so I feel like the media puts all these big stories out there. Oh, this is what's going on. And people just get so distracted by stuff that really isn't going to make much of a difference. And please point a time out to me where there wasn't some sort of mess going on in politics. I mean, I'm almost 40. I turn 40 next month. My whole life, there's always been something going on. So I think people just focus on all the wrong things. And watching the movie Network, I'd highly recommend. It's just actually come up on my feed. That's a great, great movie. And so I think it's such a reflection of who we are. Jim?
Yeah. Well, Shaq, I agree with basically what you're saying. Remember James Carville told Bill Clinton, "It's the economy, stupid." And it was one of the best advices a campaign advisor ever gave to a campaigner, because it was. There's Mark Lee. We got a shout out to, and I also wanted to say that it does matter who is president. The leadership of the country can make me ashamed, can make me proud, and it does affect my life. And I believe in the ideals that the country was founded on. And if someone is a fraud, as Trump judges convicted him already, he is a fraud. He is a con man. And if we're electing him president, what message does that send to the rest of the world? And I think there is a reason that U.S. is trying to export democracy, export freedom. And these are things that affect me, as well as the price of eggs, which is also, as you were saying, of most concern to most people.
So I was born 15 years after the end of.
Oh, Mark.
I was born 15 years after the end of World War II, which did have like a lot of bad things happen to Jews. And my kid just got engaged to a Brit, and I'm very excited because she'll eventually be able to take his last name and put it on and have a British passport with a non-Jewish last name, because in the 70s, hijackers, Middle Eastern hijackers would grab planes and they would say, "Jews, we need your passports." And those Jews would be set aside for special not great treatment. And my kid will be able to have a passport that isn't Jewish. Which is, odds that, some Palestinian's going to hijack a plane are low, but
it's horrible for you to have to feel that way in this day and age. It really is. I don't think that there's any room for hate towards any group of people, and that's heartbreaking to hear you say that. But good luck to your daughter and her marriage. To my fellow Brit.
What's that?
Shaq just congratulated you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, he seems to be a swell guy. Tall, so it's nice to have tall kids.
Oh, I was just gonna say that both things can be true at one time. Is that the media cover the sensationalism of particular news stories. That's a very bad thing, and it's a thing that the media does a lot of. But also, we do need to know some particular things. Yeah, if government corruption is there, if we turn a blind eye to it, just say that, we got to pay our bills. That's the main focus. Then we forget about, how these authoritarian governments come into play, all this democracy that we end up losing because we're not focused on, we don't understand the corruption that's happening, particularly at that time. So, so both things can be true at one time. Like, it does matter what Rick was just talking about. Actually, even what Jim had just mentioned. It does matter who is president, because they become that spokesman for the country. Under Trump, for example, because Trump did not create racism. That's always been there. It's always been a part of our lives. But hate crimes did spike based on his words. Poison control numbers spiked when he started telling people to use particular things against COVID. So it really does matter who is in that chair and what they do say. And the news has to cover particular things. But yes, you're correct. The news the media does sensationalize some things that are unnecessary.
If I can just come back to something you said, Jim, about Bill Clinton, and it's the economy stupid. There's no way to answer this, but would he have won had George H.W. not screwed up so badly? Read my lips, there will be no new taxes, and then immediately increases taxes. Why would you do that? And it if you can be critical of a president, to come off of the highs of Ronald Reagan, you're his VP, you've become the president, you've just been handed the presidency essentially. How do you screw that up and only become a one-term president? So, yeah, Bill Clinton played his cards perfectly, I think, to overcome a lot of the dissatisfaction that had occurred.
But Shaquille, one of the things that the last guest talked about, Deidre McGee and everything, who was on the World Edition. It was our extended version of that show and everything. But one of the things she talks about is emotional intelligence and critical thinking. And I've said on this show, and I'll say it again, is how much do we as a citizenry play into this as well? And I think I've even brought this up to Jim as well, because a lot of times we are so busy wanting to follow the leader and follow these PACs and whatever these organizations are and what they tell us to vote. And I get very frustrated, even on the local level, because you ask them, why did you vote for the water commissioner? And they'll tell you because so-and-so told me to vote for him, not because they necessarily are having a study around the issues that are important in that particular office and everything. I'm just using the water as an example. But is that something that we need to address, is this need to have critical thinking and emotional intelligence?
Absolutely, Mark. I couldn't agree more. And the follow the leader stuff gets a lot of people in trouble. I sometimes quibble with Sasha about this. He blames a lot of the anti-Semitic nonsense that's going on in the country on the far left, but it was the far right people that were chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And where did they get that? They didn't come up with that on their own. That was on a show, and it was a popular show, and a lot of people got it. And then a lot of people started saying it. Jews will not replace us. There are not enough of them to replace us. It's nonsense. But they were doing this to pour gasoline on the fire. So go ahead, Rick. Sorry. Oh, sorry. You had your hand up first.
Smart propagandists pick small populations to scapegoat. Jews, there are 6-7 million Jews in America, 2% of the population. Less than 1% of Americans are Muslim. Less than 1% of Americans are trans. So you want to, it's good to scapegoat wise to go after really teeny groups that don't, if you can't go after Catholics, because there's, probably 70 million Catholics in America. Catholics would be like, F you, we're coming back at you. So you go after small groups.
Pick on Protestants. That's the majority.
I didn't realize that it was only that was less than 1% of Americans being Muslim. That seems a little low, to be honest. But I won't argue with you. I don't know the stats.
Yeah, Muslims are 3 million Muslims in America.
Yeah, I believe you. I just find that
it's surprising because of how much talk gets gets ginned up about it. It's like.
And I just want to come back quickly, are we talking about all the Muslim population? Because there's a large American Muslim community that might push it up a little bit more than 1%, but that I'm not sure.
I'm talking about. I think Black Muslims are included in that statistic, but I'm not sure.
I just want to come back to
got his hand up.
Okay.
You Jacoby?
Oops, you muted yourself.
You muted yourself, Jacoby.
I was just going to agree with what both Jim and Rick were talking about, that when these smaller communities definitely get picked on because it's easier. There's less money in those communities. And truthfully, where this began, when this has always been a part of our society for a very long time. And historically speaking, for example, our tribalism, well, before I get to the example, but tribalism is now more so the game than anything. So yes, follow the leader. If they're charismatic and they take control, in all honesty, if we can be honest about it, Trump should never be the top dog in the Republican Party. There are many other people who are much better than Trump. However, the problem is it's the follow the leader mentality. And because that loudest voice right now is that MAGA mentality and that MAGA group, they've taken control of that party. Everybody's falling in line because they want that voting block. And because they want that voting block, they're going to say anything and everything. And that's picking at all the little groups that they're going to pick on. But that strategy, again, getting back to where it came from, that came out of the whole Southern strategy that Nixon put into place when the Dixiecrats left out of the Democrat Party when the Civil Rights Movement happened. they figured a way that, okay, well, we see a voting block that we can utilize and jump in and grab. So basically they used what's called that Southern strategy, where they grabbed all the animosity and the gripes that people had, especially towards minorities, and they utilized that to drive wedges through within the country, within itself. So that Southern strategy even today is being used, because if you look at the platforms that are actually being put out there and you look at the actual policies, many of the policies, like Sarah Huckabee Sanders is actually running on the fact that she actually signed legislation to ban particular words that you can use in the federal government. That's ridiculous, but that is a wedge issue that's out there. One of the biggest talking points that's being put out there by the Republican Party is, and this, I hate to make it sound like Republican, Democrat this, but no, this is just an example, is that, oh, well, they're saying that if you show up at a PTA meeting, they're going to turn you in as a terrorist because if you speak out against PTA, and that's not even true, and that's not even what happened. So yes, the media plays a role, and that goes into that whole sensationalizing thing that we talked about just a little bit ago, and it's a problem. And the tribalism that Jim was talking about, and picking at smaller groups, that Southern strategy, that's a nasty thing that's going on in our politics and in our media.
So
Yeah,
to emphasize,
I had my hand up first.
Okay,
Oh,
sorry.
Jacoby is right about the Southern strategy. That was Nixon. That was, he proclaimed that. And it was on to Reagan with states' rights. This was a whistleblow that, for Southern states, because we have to remember that the Southern states were all Democratic. And when the civil rights legislation passed, all of a sudden they became outraged. And Nixon played that like just a really smart politician, which he was. And Reagan doubled down on that. But the guy I want to bring up is Newt Gingrich, because he really controlled his Republican Congress, because what they did to them is if you didn't agree, if you didn't get into lockstep, if you didn't follow the leader, then we were going to primary you and you weren't going to be in Congress anymore. And so all of this is propagated on. And the Republican Party now, the reason guys like Governor Sununu of New Hampshire or a good governor like Nikki Haley can't win now is because of this lockstep thinking and the danger that they will not be able to even run. Sununu didn't even want to run, and he's a great conservative Republican that they should have nominated. Nikki Haley's another one, but she's trailing terribly to a guy like Trump, who was a Democrat as a Republican. He doesn't have any policies, really. He doesn't think of anything but himself. So this is one of the things that is a problem that we have in Congress now, is that we don't have really good Republicans running for office now because they know they can't win primaries. Go ahead, Rick.
In the 70s, the Democrats, especially the loony fringe Democrats, the hippies and the yippies, had aggressive, powerful messaging. But since the 70s, when conservative think tanks found out that aggressive, simple messaging can motivate people who don't pay a lot of attention, who aren't sophisticated, can get them riled up and to the polls. And the Republicans have outdone the Democrats in messaging. Trump was elected, among other reasons, because he got $4 billion in free media coverage because he said crazy crap during the 2016 election. There are companies that if you're a public figure, and you subscribe, they will send you a thing saying, you were talked about on this show, which was seen by 2 million people for 5 minutes. That's worth, if you had to pay for that, that would be worth $350,000.
And there's another thing that,
so Trump got $4 billion in free coverage for the crazy crap he said.
So just quickly, Rick, I've never heard of the term yippie. I've obviously heard of a hippie. What's a yippie? Is that an American invention? I've not heard of it. What is a yippie?
The Yippies were radical hippies led by a guy named Jerry Rubin, who did stuff like they snuck into the New York Stock Exchange with stacks of $100 bills and threw them up in the air. This is like 1970, and it was just to show how like corrosive capitalism is. It showed all these, traders like going crazy trying to snatch money out. They did aggressive, nutty stuff.
How have I not heard of these people? That sounds
yeah, I was one of them. But yes,
I want to go grab those
Have you ever heard of
that? One of the things that Trump did that was counterproductive for him was when he was in New York. He liked that publicity, and Rick is absolutely right about how the free publicity really helped him. But he got into the tabloids, and he was trying to get into the elite society in Trump. And if you're part of the elite society in New York City, you don't want to be in the tabloids. So he did everything wrong as far as that's concerned, and he was still, couldn't figure it out.
But Jim, hold on a second. But there is a person, and Jacoby will know who I'm talking about. Actually, Nick will know, and I'll just go ahead and say it. But you mentioned Newt. There was a major politician that was from this area. I sometimes tease North Carolina because we gave you both Terry Sanford and this other gentleman that I'm going to mention. But the media wizardry of Jesse Helms was no joke. Jesse Helms was a media wizard and was actually came out of the TV front. I mean, he was Senator, but he literally was part of the WRAL and our, I think that at that time they were an ABC franchise. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jacoby and everything, but definitely he came out in both radio and television and became a media legend before he even became known as Senator No and all in that space. Kim probably knew it and had some work and dealings with him during that time and everything, but he was pre-Newt Gingrich and was definitely doing some of the things that we are crediting Newt with in that 60s, 70s era and all along those lines.
Well, Newt took out the contract on America. I mean, he got it down to a science. He controlled his Congress in a way that Helms never really did.
That is true, but Helms definitely was a precursor along with Wallace.
Absolutely.
But just to think about it, though, I mean, Ronald Reagan was an actor. Arnold Schwarzenegger was an actor. The Democrat Party reached out to The Rock because he's an actor and they have influence. It's I think we talked about this on another show. The messaging itself is one thing, but that individual that people can get inspired and excited about. And it's just wild thinking about it because, yes, we forgot about policy. We forgot about what you're voting for. For example, many of the people that are on SNAP vote against SNAP. Many of the people that are in these, bad situations vote against their actual own needs. Like,
that's for sure.
It's like everything Trump talks about. For example, even now, how he's talking about, he's going to utilize the government itself and go after he's literally said he was going after his political opponents, the people that he felt wronged him. So he's going to utilize the government to do that.
Yep.
Which everybody that is voting for Trump said that's what Biden did. That's what's so bad. But you're voting for the same thing. So to get back to what Rick was talking about, I think it was a question that you talked about, Mark. Are we the problem that creates this problem? Are we the individuals that create this problem? Yes, we're part of that problem.
The flip side of that coin, there's very wealthy people that seem to vote for progressives that are suggesting that you should pay higher taxes. They're also, it would appear on the surface, they also seem to be voting against.
That's completely different. That's completely different. Because if you're talking, the reason that is completely different, Shaq, is because, for example, if the middle class, the stronger the middle class is, the more money the upper echelon make. So when you're talking about doing taxes for the middle class and doing tax breaks for the lower class, that legitimately helps you in the long run being in the upper class. So therefore, the tax rates, complaining of voting against taxes for the wealthy or voting for taxes for the wealthy and you're wealthy, that's a different story than, hey, I have no money and I'm on SNAP. I need to vote against SNAP because this Republican Party tells me that I don't really need SNAP. Now I don't really have a job and I can't pay for food. That's different. That's completely different because that rich person can afford that. And that rich person actually benefits from those tax breaks because of the wealthy or the actual increase in that stronger middle income helps the wealthy.
So off of what Jacoby was saying, charisma is unifying. Politics gets worse when we have anti-charismatic candidates. Reagan was lovable. You know, I didn't agree with any of his stuff, but he was a lovable president. Clinton, lovable. George W. Bush, lovable. Obama, lovable. But we haven't had a charismatic candidate like that for a couple of presidential election cycles, and politics sucks.
Mm-hmm.
It was also
glad
a
that
great
Tim's here,
orator,
'cause
right? So when he read that speech on behalf of Barry Goldwater, which even if you don't agree with the content of it, it was a well written speech, and he did a great job of delivery on it. So I think the person with the same initials as you, Rick Rosner, I think he was a great. He had everything that it took to be a good president.
He was initially had low approval because we were in the middle of a recession, but then he got shot, and he survived that so well in such a folksy way. He tells his wife, "Honey, I forgot to duck." People loved that.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
He became more popular.
horse.
As a
He had
result of
great
being shot.
hair. He was a very, very charming guy.
But Rick, along those same lines, I know people that when he was shot, and I will just admit that I know folks I might have even had some similar thoughts because they were so adamantly anti-Reagan that they were literally rooting that he would be incapacitated, and that's just being very forthright and very honest about what was going on in that period and everything. And I know that you probably knew some people on the West Coast as well that probably had a similar mindset, Jim, and everything, because they were not necessarily wanting him to be killed, but they definitely wanted him to be incapacitated because they felt that who was below him might be better. And I'm not saying that was factually correct, but that is a attitude that was out there when Reagan was shot.
I mean, yeah, people have thoughts about Trump, you know, but
I'm surprised that Obama survived. I really am. I just don't know how that happened, you know, but it was really great that he did. But I just assumed any time he was in the public that he was a target.
So just to touch on what Jim, what you were talking about,
Secret Service for their work protecting presidents, including Trump, because Trump's a
Right.
target. Obama's been a target. So I don't know what they do to protect these people, but I wouldn't want to do their job, I can tell you.
Jim, I will admit, so I went to the inauguration with Obama, and walking through and feeling the tension in the air, the fact that we all felt, well, I won't say we, I'll say, you know, the individuals that I knew and the individuals that I spoke with and the individuals that I've spoken with afterwards, just lots of people. I won't say everybody. So I'll just start with just the people and stick with the personal side, because yes, I could feel a tension in the air that people felt that Obama was not going to make it through that day.
Right.
Because of the fact of the history of this country and what has taken place in our history. There was and when he walked down the street beside the car and everything else with Michelle and his two lovely daughters, yes, there was a tension there, and there was a fear, a deathly fear in the air that he was not going to make it just because of that in our history. And so I'm so happy that he did. But again, yeah, I mean, it was there.
In our history of assassinations, a lot of it, there doesn't seem to be a huge correlation between who you'd think would get shot and who does get shot. There were 2 assassination attempts on President Ford within like a month. And President Ford was one of the most, bland, he was like a placeholder president.
It was Squeaky Fromm, and who was the other one? Because I know Squeaky Fromm was one of the assassinations against Ford.
I forget the other one, but it was a similar thing. Just like crazy people often, do their assassinating based on like Kennedy, like Lee Harvey Oswald, if he indeed was the assassin, like he didn't he was just a nut. It wasn't any kind of specific political, he was
Americans
just,
tend not to assassinate people for having the wrong political opinion. Americans tend to assassinate people who say something stupid like "Let's all live in peace." Look at the Beatles. What's his name?
John Lennon.
John Lennon, right? Let's give peace a try. Oh, you're out of here. Bang. I mean, you have a look at all, Gandhi, no, that's not an American, but Gandhi, let's give peace a try. Bang, you're out of here. That's what generally happens. If you start telling people...
Reagan
he was more popular than Jesus that got him killed.
Reagan got assassinated by a guy who just wanted to go on a date with Jodie Foster.
Yeah, and to your point and everything, Shaquille, one of the greatest arguments within the African American community was this notion of Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. And as I said on the other show, it wasn't until Malcolm X went away from some of the radical notions of Black nationalism into more of this idea of I just came back from Mecca and I saw some people that looked very fair-skinned that were worshiping the same God as I was worshiping, that made me a target and everything.
That's exactly my point, right? He came back and said something crazy. Oh, we're all the same. Let's love each other. No. You're dead. Get rid of you. We can't have ideas like that. I don't know why we do that, but whenever we come across somebody that pushes a message of peace, they, for some reason, the risk of them being assassinated goes up. So
I've got a question for Kim that I was going to ask her, and it comes back to something we were talking about earlier. But I've been hearing several people saying that particularly white women are voting against their interests and all along those lines. And as somebody that represents both that community as well as the Native American community, because I know that that's part of your heritage as well, what is your answer to those folks that are saying that sometimes they are voting against what they are perceived to be in their interest, whether that is around abortion or a number of other hot button issues? But that's something about it. I've been hearing a lot of conversations around where people are like, how can you vote for Trump? He's the one that is doing all these sexist things or things along those lines. So that's an example of what they say is an example of white women voting against their interests. Do you agree with that, or do you think that there is political rhetoric?
You're muted.
You're on mute, Kim.
You're muted.
There we go.
There you go.
I believe that, women are voting based on their experiences. And, some women may have had a great experience with the Trump administration. Some may feel more secure because they have, they feel like during that administration, they had better opportunities with lower interest rates in lending or an opportunity to do other things. They don't really look at, and a lot of people don't look at this, how the ripple effect works from one administration to the other. A lot of people don't look at that. So I believe that, hold on just a second.
Sure.
Got a lot of weird things going on here today. I believe that they are voting based on propaganda that they hear and read. They don't have time to get out and do a lot of research. So, you hear that, well, it was better during Trump administration, but sometimes things carry over a different way. And even Trump said this in his speech, that the new president has to always clean up after the previous president. And of course, in that speech, he goes, and I certainly don't want to come in behind Biden, but I'll do it. So, how much did Biden have to clean up? And then that cost us because he had to come in and clean up because of all the PPP loans that went out and then got forgiven. It didn't come, the money didn't come back to where it came from, right? It's gone. So there's a lot of things that play into all of this. It's a lack of education. I'm not saying a lack of their education, but it's a lack of information being processed to people and a lack of education of that information. And I just think, I don't think that they're voting wrong. I think they're voting exactly the way they should based on the information they have and based on their heart.
I know people who quite reasonably vote for Trump because they have a ton of money and they like low taxes. I know people who unreasonably vote for Trump because they're buying into the whole values voter thing that Trump will stop like the tide of trans people that's rolling across the nation that's going to turn us all into sexually indeterminate, that kind of garbage.
Can I go after
It's
Jim?
fear. They use a lot of fear and pointing fingers to drive these elections. Yeah, and freedom.
Freedom.
Yeah.
I don't blame anybody who voted for Trump in 2016, because we were so sick of the inaction of the Congress. We were so sick of the governance ineffectiveness. Ted Cruz called him a pathological liar. Another senator from South Carolina called him a clown. They didn't want him, but he won. And it's because we were sick of the way things were happening, and we were going to just, roll the dice, see what he did. And, so if he voted for him in 2016, and a lot of suburban white women did. But since then, they have not. And as the majority of suburban white women have not voted for the Republican Party. And this is the one thing that is really the worst thing that the Republicans have been doing is about abortion. That has been a defining issue for a lot of women. And the Republican Party, look what happened in 2018, 2020, 2022, just this year, all of these things, like Kansas put abortion into their state constitution. Ohio just did, so we cannot underplay how inaccurate the Republican Party is reflecting the voters' beliefs right now.
I have to agree with you.
just
They
say that-
play on the fear and they play on the consciousness that, but I always have to just shake my head. All these people who claim to be pro-lifers and they don't care about the life of that child after it's born. What happens to that child when it's born?
Bingo.
And no money is put aside to help that child, and then we're left with a larger deficit of the crimes that go against that child. Just like nobody looks at the lives of other people. You want children to be born, but then you want them to be killed. I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Jack is up, Nick.
If I can just say,
No,
really quickly,
we're the show's over. We're past the
We
deadline.
can go a little bit
Oh,
over.
we're past the
World
hour.
Politics will be on
It's a good
Tuesday.
show.
So we can go a little bit over. We went over the last one, Nick.
Well, I have to go.